Many years ago, when Kate and I were just married, we took a weekend trip with some dear friends into the winelands of the Cape in South Africa. We stayed on an olive farm with some friends. It was a delightful few days, but little did we know what awaited us on the mountain pass as we came home on Sunday night. In those days, we drove an old Toyota hatchback. I've never seen a car like that in this country, but there are quite a few on the roads in South Africa. At least there were when we were living there. And as we climbed the mountain pass on our way home that night, the car seemed to be going quite fine. But near the bottom of the mountain, we heard those noises that no one wants to hear in a car, especially not on a Sunday night. It shook and spattered and then just died. And thankfully, we were coming down the mountain, so I was able to sort of put the vehicle into neutral and steer it down the mountain, and even I think into a gas station, as I remember. But it was now a problem, right? There I was with my newly married bride. It was night, and the car was dead. And I had no clear way on how to get home, let alone how to get us to work the next day. It was a desperate situation. Now, it is not the same kind of desperation that we will see Ruth and Naomi facing. Their situation is far more serious, but I think you can imagine the measure of fear, worry, that kind of filled my heart that Sunday night. Perhaps you feel something of that this morning. Perhaps you know what it's like to have trouble corner you and to know very clearly that you are dependent on the mercy of others to rescue you. Maybe you feel very desperate this morning. Maybe you're very conscious of your need of God this morning. If that's you, if you feel any measure of desperation or distress this morning, then Ruth chapter 2 is for you. This sermon is for you. We continue our study in the book of Ruth, looking this morning at chapter 2. It is printed for you there on your bulletins. Also, you can find in the Pew Bible, page 222. Last time, we looked at Ruth chapter 1, and we saw how fragile, how remarkably fragile human life can be. We watched a family of 4 flee their homeland and seek refuge in a foreign country, only to see this one woman bury not just her husband, but both her sons. Her name was Naomi, and it appeared at first glance that the Lord had ripped all that was good in her life away. But this is not true, right? If you remember, God did not abandon her. In time, he would lift the famine in Bethlehem, and so open a way for Naomi to make her way home. And most importantly, in God's mysterious providence, he caused one of her daughters-in-law, Ruth, to come with her. You may remember the surprise that the surprising decision Ruth made to go with Naomi to Bethlehem, even though she was a foreigner, and even though she had very, very little chance, therefore, of getting married again, going to Judah. But she went, and she was driven primarily by her faith, not just in Naomi, but especially in Naomi's God, the God of Israel. The chapter, if you remember, ends with Naomi back home in Bethlehem, just in time for the barley harvest, and Ruth, her devoted daughter-in-law, is by her side. We pick up the story now in chapter 2, with Ruth making a desperate errand to find food. We'll look at the chapter again in 3 scenes. I'll give you the headings as we go along. But follow now as I read Ruth chapter 1, the first 7 verses. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, Let me go into the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So here is scene one, a desperate errand. I'll give you headings for all three scenes. Here's the first one, a desperate errand, a desperate search. Our story begins with Ruth seeking permission from her mother-in-law to go into the farmlands on the outskirts of Bethlehem. Now let's try and imagine the scene. It's thousands of years ago. It's early morning, probably just before sunrise, and the room is cold. There is no electricity, no central heating, right? And these women are probably sitting on the floor with blankets over their shoulders. They are not drinking coffee. There's no Starbucks run. There's likely no coffee machine. Probably drinking just some water that was stored in a clay pot overnight. And in this moment, before the day even begins, Ruth makes this bold suggestion. She says, let me go glean in the field. Naomi says, okay, my daughter, you go and glean. Now, what exactly is Ruth proposing? This word glean is going to occur again and again throughout our passage. It's an important reference. I don't know when last you went gleaning, but it's been a long time for me. What are we talking about? Well, through the law of Moses, centuries before this time, God gave instructions to farmers to not strip their fields bare, but to leave some left over from the harvest for the poor. Listen to Leviticus 19, verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap to the edge of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not strip your vineyard bare or gather its fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor and the resident alien. I am the Lord your God. Ruth must have known about this law, and so she says to her mother-in-law, let me go and work. Now, you are not going to get rich doing this. It was hard, back-breaking work under the Middle East sun, and it was dangerous work. We'll see several times in our passage references to Ruth being very, very vulnerable out in the open field. You can imagine a single woman, a young woman, out in the field, mostly amongst men that she doesn't know and who do not know her. So why does Ruth go? Why go do this heavy, hard labor? Why expose herself to danger in the field? Well, because she has no other choice. Now, she and Naomi are not rich widows. They are poor. Their pantry is empty, and she is desperate. And that brings us really to the main question that we must have in our minds as we try and make sense of Ruth chapter 2. I'm not going to give you the main idea, but I will give you the main question. It is simply this. What is God doing when his people face desperate times? What is he doing? What is God doing when his people have few options, when their future looks bleak and they are scared? Where is our God? Well, the narrator of Ruth gives us a hint to the answer to this question very early on in the story. Look again there at verse 1. You're in verse 1, the narrator tells us of a man, Boaz. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. A worthy man. He's probably wealthy, powerful, influential, He's probably also a man of good character. Now, why would the narrator tell us this? Well, it builds a little bit of expectation. Because remember, we understand this because the narrator has told us Ruth and Naomi aren't mindful of Boaz, not yet, right? And so this sets us up to read verse 3. Look at verse 3 again. So she, that's Ruth, set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. Now, don't take this literally. The writer of the scriptures here is not confessing his belief in mere chance. No, he was writing this purely from Ruth's human experience. And as he writes this, he's essentially winking at us. She happened. It just so happened that she entered the field that belongs to Boaz. Now we should ask, will we meet him? Will he appear? What will he do? Well, look at verse 4. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. So at this point, we should start connecting the dots. We know of a man that they don't know about. When Ruth asked Naomi, should I go? Let me go into the farm fields and glean. Naomi doesn't say, you know what? We have a relative. He's a wealthy man. He probably owns a lot of field. Go and ask for the name of the man, Boaz. Naomi doesn't do that. But we know. And now Ruth's about to meet this man. Scene 2. Follow as I read from verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and your mother and your native land, have come and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers. And he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied. And she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Ruth comes into this field with very low expectations. She asks, as we see there in verse 7, she just asks to glean. She has a simple request. And Boaz surprises Ruth with his answer. So this is scene 2, heading a surprising mercy. A surprising mercy. Boaz not only agrees to her request, but he provides her with protection, right? He instructs his workers, the men, not to harass her. And he provides her with water that she doesn't have to draw from the well. That's a kindness, but also it's going to help her work faster. She doesn't have to leave the field to go find the well, to work the well, to pull out the water. She can save her energy and just drink from the water that somebody else is going to draw for her. This might not seem like much to you, but to Ruth it's astonishing. What did she do? Verse 10, then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground. Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Ruth's amazed. She's amazed by this man's gracious treatment of her. And in her humility, she bows to the ground. And as I read this week again, I was convicted. I was convicted. It's so easy to overlook when people do kind things to you. Children, isn't it so easy to take mom for granted? Husbands, isn't it so easy to take your wife, the mother of your children, for granted? It's so easy for all of us, isn't it? To become thankless, to slip into this attitude of entitlement. Perhaps even just a mild version of it. That somehow I am always owed a measure of ease and comfort. Some of the pastoral staff and some of the elders traveled to a conference in Atlanta on Thursday, and we arrived back yesterday. It was a really encouraging conference, the Acme National Strategy Conference. In the days to come, probably tonight and definitely next Sunday evening at the members' meeting, we will share more with you about the amazing things that we are a part of through our association with these other churches. But one particular story touched me. Late yesterday morning, an Afghan man shared of his desire to build healthy churches in Afghanistan, where Christians follow Christ at risk of their own lives. And this man shared how he has suffered himself as a Christian, been in prison, and experienced the Taliban taking away his own friends, fellow believers, and killing them for their faith. And as I listened, I was convicted, thinking, my goodness, I take for granted the many ways in which God is kind to me as I live as a Christian here in the West. Ruth reminds us that grace should humble us. Ruth reminds us that as we grow in spiritual maturity, grace should continue to astound us and not get something that becomes smaller and smaller over time. In verse 10, Ruth asks a very sincere question. Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me? It's an interesting phrase. She doesn't say, why have I found favor that you'd be so generous towards me? He has been generous. That you've been compassionate to me. He has. But she says that you have noticed me. You have seen me. Boaz gives a very thoughtful answer. He says, well, I've seen how you have been devoted to your mother-in-law. I've seen your sacrifice as you've left your own country, your mother, your father, your homeland, and come to a foreign place. And then in verse 12, an echo from Ruth chapter 1, we see again Ruth's main motivation for coming to Israel. Why is she there? Because she seeks refuge at the end of verse 12 under the wings of the God of Israel. Refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. This is a common metaphor of God and his faithfulness to his people in their weakness. Friends, this is what our God is like. He gives refuge to those who are desperate. I wonder if you need to realize that and remember that this morning. I wonder what burdens bring you to church this morning. Perhaps it's your future that does look a little bleak. Perhaps it is finances. Maybe it is your struggle with your own sin. Let me encourage you to remember what the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, the God who comes to us in the person of Jesus Christ, what is he like? He is gentle. He is eager to stretch his wings to provide comfort and refuge for all who would come to him with faith. And if you're not a Christian here this morning, we're so glad you're here. Perhaps you feel very outside. Perhaps you feel like an imposter coming to church. Please take note of who this woman Ruth is. She is a foreigner, a Moabite, someone who comes from a history of people who are false worshippers, who are actually enemies of God's people. And here she is, seeking, running for refuge in the God of Israel. Follow her. The God of the Bible loves to provide rescue and comfort to all kinds of people with all kinds of backgrounds if they will come to him with faith. Now, as the scene unfolds, the kindness of Boaz accumulates. At mealtime, he invites her to his table, and she will eat until she is satisfied. I wonder when Ruth did that. And after she's done with her meal at the table, she will go into the field with protection. And, verse 15, Boaz will tell the reapers, listen, even as you chop down some things, don't gather them up, throw them on the field so Ruth can pick them up. How amazing the day has turned for Ruth and for Naomi. Just think what's happened today for these women. Ruth goes out just hoping to scavenge, just hoping to get just a little bit. If she lived today, she'd probably be hoping to get some work that'll provide just a few gallons of gas, right? And just a small bag of groceries from Aldi. But at the end of the day, she has a big bag of barley. You see that, verse 17? So she gleaned until evening in the field. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. That would have been about the equivalent of half a month's wages. Just one day's work. As a scavenger. This would have been a big surprise to Ruth. And remember, Naomi doesn't know anything. So what is she going to say? What will she say when she sees this big bag that Ruth drags home? That brings us to scene 3 from verse 18. Follow now as I read. And she, that's Ruth, took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, so she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, this man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Scene 3, a redeemer revealed. A redeemer revealed. So you can picture the scene. Ruth stumbles as she carries in this large, massive bag of grain. And immediately Naomi recognizes something happened today. Somebody has been exceptionally kind to her daughter-in-law. And the big question now is, who did this? Who is this man? Remember, we've known far more than what Ruth and Naomi have known the whole story, right? And so Ruth names the wealthy, at least Ruth knows who the wealthy landlord is, but she doesn't know how this man's related to her. And of course, Naomi at this point doesn't know who this person is. And friends, the whole chapter really leads us and is running towards this particular moment. Verse 1 opened with the name of Boaz, and we were told that he's a relative of Naomi. We were also told that he's a wealthy man, and then we watched as he astounded Ruth with his kindness and his mercy and his generosity. And now we're about to watch Naomi join Ruth in her relief and joy and praise to the Lord. Look at verse 19. As the moment comes to sort of inform Naomi of the identity of the man, verse 19 is unnecessarily long, that last sentence. All Naomi wanted to know is, who's his name? Why didn't Ruth just say Boaz? Why doesn't she say, Boaz is the name of the man in whose field I gleaned? But look what she says. Notice the tension, verse 19. The last sentence. The man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz. And now the story turns. Whole story, not just chapter 2. Naomi now realizes that God seems to be doing more than just provide food, but perhaps even stage redemption. Look what she says. The man's name, verse 20, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. Remember how Naomi came into Bethlehem at the end of chapter 1. Remember the women arrived and surrounded her at the city gates and said, isn't this Naomi? What did she say? Don't call me Naomi. Don't call me pleasant, for the Lord has dealt very bitterly with me. And now, what did she say now? Now she remembers that the Lord gives blessing, and he does not forsake his kindness to the living or the dead. Why this reference to the dead? Of course, God has remembered Naomi and Ruth by providing food for her, but why does Naomi say that the Lord's kindness has not forsaken the dead? I think here Naomi is remembering that Boaz is a redeemer, as she mentions, and a redeemer in Israel could step into the family situation when they are in ruin and provide refuge and redemption as he buys back the land, provides cover for the vulnerable. Naomi sees in Boaz the potential for God to provide a descendant for her dead husband and preserve his line. Naomi is able to look over the whole day and see that God has been at work all the time, even in the shadows. Here is the big idea of the chapter, right? Even in our desperate days, God is always at work, doing amazing things. Friends, these days, the moments of this day, they are not random. Yes, he does speak of Naomi happening to enter this particular field. But as I mentioned, that the writer is being a little cheeky, isn't he? He wants you to connect the dots. As we see Naomi enter this particular field, as we see Boaz coming from Bethlehem, a meeting, as we see him speaking so kindly, so generously, so favorably to this woman. We should remember Proverbs 21 verse 1. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. This is not mere coincidence. This is not mere chance. This is our God working quietly behind the scenes to provide for these desperate widows. And friends, let me remind you, that's how so often God works to take care of us. There is no voice of heaven most days, right? God doesn't reveal his whole plan for us in one go. No, he meets us in ordinary moments of grace. God provides a meal, a conversation, a person who notices us, a door that opens, or just enough strength for the day. And sometimes those moments surprise us, right? The meal brings unexpected refreshment. The conversation lifts our spirits more than we hoped. And in those moments, we see that God is caring for us. Friends, this should help us navigate our desperate moments, right? When life with our children feels overwhelming, when the workload at the office seems like it's too much, when the week of exams coming looks like it will crush us, in those moments we can resist to panic and breathe and remember that our God has not abandoned us. And we can do the next faithful thing. Do you realize that Naomi didn't wait for a dream? She didn't wait for God to speak in some vision. All she did was apply her mind, seek counsel with her mother-in-law, and do what the next faithful thing looked like she should do. She went out to glean. I imagine that's not what you should do. Perhaps you just need to do the dishes, or take out the trash, or just be faithful at work, or go for a run, or go to sleep, and trust that God, in what seems like the ordinary run of the day, will very likely show up and care for you. And we should also recognize that God is doing something more than just provide for these women temporary provisions. He's clearly doing that. But as Naomi makes reference to Boaz's identity as a redeemer, she recognized that God is doing more than just providing food for today or for the coming weeks. No, God seems, at least Naomi thinks, God appears to be doing something bigger, staging a greater redemption. Friends, and we should remember that He's doing that for us all the time. Right? As you try to just be faithful with the very difficult diagnosis that you perhaps are facing, you don't know how God will use that in your life and in the life of others. As you persevere with a boss that perhaps is extremely unreasonable, perhaps even abusive, you don't know how the Lord will use that to perhaps awaken your unbelieving colleague. As we continue our study in Ruth, we will see Boaz doing great things for Ruth, for Naomi, but he will die, sadly, as we all will. And yet in time, indeed, in the fullness of time, God will bring us a better Redeemer. Right, as we think about Boaz and all his wonderful qualities, and there are many, we should look beyond him and remember the other man who came into our world, the Lord Jesus Christ. Like Boaz, Jesus took pity on the vulnerable again and again. Like Boaz, Jesus welcomes the outsider, and He used His power and authority countless times to serve those who were weak and miserable. He heals the sick, He casts out the demons, He feeds the hungry. And remember, Jesus became like one of us. He is our kinsman redeemer because He took on our human nature. We are saved by a man who has a belly button. The God-man, fully God and fully man. That is our true Redeemer, and He humbled Himself to become our servant. In love, Jesus went to the cross, as you know, willingly, to pay the price of our sins, even though He was sinless. And on that cross, Jesus took all our sins away, all the sins of all the people who would ever hear the gospel, hear of the God of Israel in the Old Testament, and turn to Him with faith. Boaz was, as we read and have seen, was a worthy man. But Jesus is so much better. Boaz is dead. Jesus is not. He has been raised from the dead to prove to us and to everyone that there is no other name under heaven by which we can be saved. If you have come in here this morning sensing your desperation, let me urge you to remember that we are desperate ultimately, in all kinds of ways, ultimately because we are sinners, because we have rebelled against a holy God. If there was no sin in this world, we would not be desperate, ever. For we would live in the life-giving presence of a holy God, always finding refuge under his wings. But because we have sinned, we have been cut off from God. And because this God is holy, he has set a day when he will judge the world in righteousness. And I can assure you, if you are still in your sin on that judgment day, you will feel desperation like nothing you will experience in this world. But you can be like Ruth. You can run to this God who eagerly provides refuge for those who seek it under his wings. There's one thing I must point out before we close. Look again at verse 23. Speaking of Ruth again, so she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. It's sweet, but not quite full fulfillment. Ruth is able to work every day under the protection of Boaz. She has food for today and probably the weeks to come. But she's still living with her mother-in-law. She is still a foreign woman with no father, with no brother, with no husband. She is vulnerable. She needs bigger redemption. But for now, she must wait. It's an excellent picture of Christians, of our life. We have received redemption. If you're in Christ and you have full forgiveness of your sins, you have the Spirit. And yet we need full redemption. Indeed, God has promised us a full redemption. Resurrected bodies. A day when we'll be done with sin and temptation. God has promised a day when we will see him face to face. And yet, like Ruth, that's not today. We have to wait. And yet we have reason to wait with hope, right? For God's promises are never empty. His plans are never frustrated. We see in Ruth that even in the desperate days, God is always doing far more than we can see. And so we can trust him. Will you do that? Let me pray.